The call came through on a Thursday afternoon, and my brother was already walking toward the parking garage elevator when his phone lit up. I watched him from the lobby, his posture, the way his shoulders carried the particular looseness of someone who believes the hard part is over. His wife Renee had her hand looped through his arm, and they were moving the way people move when they've just closed a deal they weren't entirely sure they'd close. My mother had been in the ground for 11 days. The life insurance documents I had just co-signed were still in the manila envelope tucked under my arm. His phone rang a second time. He answered it on speaker without checking the screen, the way you do when you're expecting a confirmation rather than a complication. The voice on the other end was flat and professional and completely without warmth. "This is Daniel Marsh from the Special Investigations Unit at Meridian Life. We need to speak with your family immediately regarding the Callaway policy. There may be a problem with the beneficiary designation on file." My brother stopped walking. His wife stopped with him. I did not stop. I kept moving toward the exit through the glass doors, out into the gray October air, and I did not look back. I want to tell you what led to that moment, because the lobby scene is easy to misread without the 14 months that came before it. My mother's name was Patricia, and she was a dental hygienist for 26 years at the same practice in Glendale, Arizona. She was the kind of person who kept a handwritten grocery list on the refrigerator and remembered every birthday in the family without a single calendar reminder. She was also, by the time I was old enough to understand it, a woman who had spent most of her adult life quietly managing the gap between what she had and what her children needed, and never once mentioning the effort it cost her. I am 29 years old. I work as a financial analyst for a mid-sized accounting firm in Phoenix. I spend my days building models, testing assumptions, reading the architecture of numbers until the story inside them becomes visible. It is not glamorous work. It does not make for good conversation at dinner, but it means I have a particular relationship with documentation, with discrepancies, with the small places where a figure that should align with another figure quietly does not. My brother Marcus is 6 years older than me. He works in commercial real estate, which means he is very comfortable talking about money and considerably less comfortable actually managing it. He married Renee 9 years ago, and Renee is the kind of person who refers to her home as a brand and her social circle as a network, and who has always regarded my mother's modest 3-bedroom house in Glendale as a project waiting to happen. I say this not to be unkind but to be accurate. Accuracy matters when you are trying to explain how a family fractures. My mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of ovarian cancer in the spring of 2 years ago. The oncologist was gentle about it in the way that oncologists learn to be careful with language, deliberate with pacing, but the meaning was not ambiguous. We were looking at treatment, not cure. We were managing a timeline, not reversing one. Within 6 weeks of the diagnosis, I had reorganized my schedule to drive my mother to her infusion appointments on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I took over her insurance correspondence because her carrier had begun requiring prior authorizations for medication combinations that her oncologist had been prescribing for years, and navigating that process requires a specific tolerance for bureaucratic friction that my mother did not have the energy for anymore. I handled her short-term disability paperwork when she stopped being able to work full days. I reviewed her Medicare supplement policy when the out-of-pocket projections started becoming difficult to look at directly. Marcus visited on holidays and occasionally on weekends. He brought flowers, usually the pre-made grocery store arrangements still wrapped in cellophane, and he sat in the living room and asked my mother how she was feeling in the tone of someone who has mentally already moved on to the next item on their agenda. Renee came with him sometimes and spent most of these visits photographing the backyard garden and mentioning, more than once, that the house had good bones. Neither of them contributed to my mother's care expenses. I did not ask them to. What I did not anticipate was what that silence would eventually cost me. The conversation about my mother's estate began approximately 3 weeks before she died, which I want you to sit with for a moment, not after she died, before. My mother had entered home hospice care, and was largely sleeping through the afternoons when Marcus called me on a Sunday morning with what he described as an important conversation we needed to have. He used the phrase "while we still can," which I understood immediately was not about including our mother in the discussion. It was about the window of time before she became legally incapacitated to make changes. He had prepared, as I would learn, extensively. He explained that our mother's life insurance policy, a $250,000 term policy she had maintained for nearly 20 years, was currently split equally between the two of us as named beneficiaries. He explained that he and Renee had consulted with a financial advisor and determined that given my mother's outstanding medical bills and the cost of settling her estate, it would be more efficient, from a tax and administrative standpoint, for the policy benefit to flow to a single beneficiary who could then manage distribution. He said single beneficiary the way you say it when you already know who you mean. He said he and Renee were prepared to handle everything. He said my name would come off the policy as a courtesy to the family. I am a financial analyst. I know what a tax efficiency argument sounds like when it is real, and I know what it sounds like when it is a wrapper around a different conversation entirely. This was the second kind. I told Marcus I needed to think about it. He said there was a time pressure, which there always is in these conversations. I said I understood and I would get back to him within a few days. I hung up the phone and sat at my kitchen table for a long time before I picked up my laptop. The Meridian Life policy had been in my mother's name since I was 11 years old. I knew this because my mother had shown it to me when I turned 18, the way some parents show their children the location of the will. She had been that deliberate about it. She believed in being prepared, in leaving things in order, in not burdening the people she loved with confusion during the worst moments of their lives. The policy paperwork was in a green accordion folder in her filing cabinet, and I had seen it there as recently as 4 months earlier when I was helping her locate her Medicare card. 3 days after Marcus's phone call, I drove to my mother's house during one of her better afternoons and asked if I could look through the filing cabinet for her insurance documents. She said of course. I found the accordion folder. I opened it. The original policy was there, with its original beneficiary designation, my name and Marcus's name, 50% each, exactly as she had told me. Behind it was a second document I had not seen before. It was a beneficiary change form, dated 7 weeks earlier. The form listed a single beneficiary, Marcus's name. Below the signature line was my mother's signature, or something that was presented as my mother's signature. I held the paper under the window light for a moment, the way you hold something when you already know what you're looking at but need a moment before you can say it clearly, even to yourself. My mother had been in her first round of heavy chemotherapy 7 weeks earlier. I had driven her to 4 of those appointments. I had sat with her afterward when she was too nauseated to sit upright without help. I knew with complete certainty what her cognitive and physical state had been during that period. I also knew that she had never mentioned changing the policy, not once, and my mother was not a woman who made significant financial decisions without telling me. She had called me before buying a new water heater. I photographed the document carefully. I put it back exactly where I found it. I kissed my mother on the forehead, told her I would be back Tuesday for her appointment, and drove home. I did not call Marcus. I did not mention the document to anyone except one person, my college roommate Danny, who spent 8 years working in insurance compliance before moving to a risk consulting firm. I called Danny that evening and described what I had found. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Give me the policy number. I want to look at something." She called me back the following morning. She told me that forged beneficiary designations on life insurance policies are more common than most people realize, particularly in the period surrounding a terminal diagnosis, and that insurance companies maintain special investigations units specifically for this purpose. She told me that Meridian Life was known in the industry for aggressive fraud review. She told me that if a policy beneficiary change had been submitted during a period when the policyholder's cognitive capacity was demonstrably compromised by medical treatment, and if the signature on the change form did not match the policyholder's signature on file with the same precision expected under a notarized document, that discrepancy would be flagged. She told me that companies don't always flag these things on their own, but they almost always investigate when a complaint is filed. I want to be honest with you about the days that followed, because I think it is easy to read a story like this and imagine that the person at the center of it moved through it cleanly, with certainty, with a kind of procedural calm. I did not. I spent 2 days unable to eat a full meal. I sat with the knowledge that my brother had, in all likelihood, walked into a UPS store or a document center somewhere and written my mother's name on a form while she was too sick to know it was happening, and I had to decide what I was going to do with that knowledge while she was still alive, and while everything I did had the potential to reach her and cause her pain. I chose, ultimately, not to tell her. I believe she did not know. I believe she would have been devastated in a way that would have cost her something I was not willing to let it cost. I made that choice deliberately, and I would make it again. What I did instead was this. I requested my mother's complete medical records from her oncology team covering the 7-week period around the beneficiary change date. I gathered copies of every document I had personally handled during her care appointment records, prior authorization letters, the forms I had filed on her behalf, all of which established a documented picture of her condition during that window. I wrote a detailed and factual account of what I had observed about her cognitive state during her heaviest treatment period. And I submitted a formal fraud inquiry to Meridian Life's Special Investigations Unit, attaching the photograph of the change form, the original policy with its original beneficiary designation, and the medical record summary. I did this quietly, from my home, on a Wednesday evening, before Marcus had any indication I had found the document at all. My mother died 23 days later. It was a Tuesday morning, early enough that the light coming through her bedroom window was still pale. I was there. Marcus arrived 2 hours after. Renee arrived with him, and she had already changed into what I can only describe as a funeral-appropriate outfit that did not look like something she had pulled from her closet in a hurry. I want to be fair to myself and say that I did not think about any of this in that room on that morning. In that room on that morning, I was only her daughter and everything else receded entirely. The weeks that followed were administrative in the way that grief is always partly administrative. Death generates paperwork in a volume that feels specifically designed to keep you moving so that you cannot stop and feel the full weight of what happened. I managed most of it. Marcus appeared for the decisions that felt significant and disappeared for the ones that were merely necessary. Renee made suggestions about the house that I did not engage with. The insurance claim was filed through the estate attorney's office approximately 3 weeks after my mother's death. Marcus was listed as the sole beneficiary on the change form on file. I knew this was coming. I had prepared for this. What Marcus did not know, and what I had not told him, was that Meridian Life had opened a formal investigation into the beneficiary change 11 days before my mother died. I had received a written acknowledgement of my complaint. I had been asked to make myself available for a follow-up call. I had done everything that was asked of me. The investigation was already in progress before a single claim dollar had been requested. The estate attorney scheduled a meeting to review the insurance distribution along with the other elements of the estate. The meeting was held at his office in Scottsdale on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus arrived with Renee. I arrived alone. We sat across a narrow conference table with a window behind us that looked out onto a parking structure. The attorney, a careful and unhurried man named Mr. Castellano, walked through the estate items methodically. When he reached the life insurance policy, he noted that the beneficiary of record was Marcus, and that the claim had been submitted to Meridian Life for processing. I asked, with the mild neutrality of someone who is asking a procedural question, whether the claim had cleared. Mr. Castellano said the carrier had not yet released funds and had indicated there was a processing delay. Marcus asked what kind of delay. Mr. Castellano said he did not have specifics and would follow up. Renee made a small sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a word. I looked at my hands. We walked out of the meeting together, through the elevator and into the parking garage. I had co-signed the estate summary documents before leaving, which was routine. The manila envelope with my copies was under my arm. We reached the elevator bank, and Marcus's phone rang. He answered it on speaker. The rest you already know. What you need to understand about Meridian Life's investigation is that they had already identified the problem before I submitted my complaint. The change form had been submitted electronically through a third-party document portal, and the metadata attached to the submission traced back to an IP address that was not my mother's home network and was not consistent with any device she was known to use. The signature itself, when compared against the wet signatures on the original policy and on her other insurance documents, presented 3 measurable inconsistencies that their forensic document reviewer had flagged independently. My complaint had not created the investigation. It had confirmed it, accelerated it, and provided the medical documentation that completed the picture. Marcus's claim was denied 48 hours after that phone call in the parking garage. The denial triggered an automatic referral to the Arizona Department of Insurance's Fraud Division. What followed from there is, as of the time I am speaking to you, still ongoing and not something I will characterize beyond what is factually established. What is established is this: the original beneficiary designation was reinstated. The policy benefit was processed through the estate according to my mother's original wishes equally, to both her children, as she had always intended. I used my portion to pay down the debt I had accumulated managing her care, and to set aside a small amount in an account I opened in her name for no particular reason, except that it felt right to keep something of hers continuing forward. I did not feel victorious. I want to be precise about that because I think these stories are often told as though the ending provides a clean resolution, and it does not. What I felt, mostly, was a specific and heavy kind of grief for the version of my brother I had believed existed before I held that change form under the window light. That version was someone I had trusted without thinking about it, the way you trust the floor beneath you not consciously, just as a condition of moving through the world. Losing that kind of trust is not dramatic. It is quiet and permanent, and it changes the texture of ordinary things. I have not spoken to Marcus since the investigation referral. I did not block his number because I did not feel the particular energy that blocking requires. I simply have nothing to say, and the phone has not rung, and that tells me he has concluded the same. I have continued seeing the same therapist I started with 2 months before my mother died, and she has told me something I return to often, that the people who love us do not always know how to love us correctly, and that the failure is theirs, but the weight of it lands on us, and we are allowed to put it down. I found that more useful than I expected to. What I keep thinking about is the accordion folder in my mother's filing cabinet. The fact that she organized it that way, the original policy in front, everything in order, labeled clearly, accessible to whoever needed it, is so completely her that it still makes my chest tighten when I picture it. She spent her whole life making sure that the people she loved would not be confused or burdened or left without what they needed. She had done that work carefully, for decades, and someone who knew exactly where to find it had tried to undo it from the inside. The reason it didn't work was not only because I found the document. It was because she had kept such careful records. Because her oncologist had documented her treatment precisely. Because the insurance company's own systems had flagged the inconsistency before I ever called them. Because my mother had been the kind of person who maintained a policy for 26 years and signed it the same way every single time. She protected us. Even at the end, she protected us. I want to ask you something, and I mean it as a real question rather than a way of wrapping this up neatly. When the threat to what you've been given comes not from a stranger but from someone who shares your history, your name, your photographs on the same walls, how do you decide what you owe them and what you owe yourself? And how do you hold both of those things without one of them destroying the other? I am still working on the answer. I think I will be for a long time. But I also think that my mother, who kept a policy in a green accordion folder for 26 years so that her children would be taken care of, would tell me that working on it is enough,